Okay, good day. Today we're going to do Oyster Decan, the second Decan of Sagittarius. I'll start with view number 24, the correlated image from Hokusei, from the 36 views of Mount Fuji. In the image we can see that Mount Fuji is cold. It's mostly white with a little bit of dark blue. It's cold and stable. In almost every image there's an object in the image that is the one that you're supposed to pay the most attention to, something he knew and understood. Although there are many components, I think the object of this image is that hill. I don't think that's a reach. We've got some elements here. You've got a hill that seems to have some smaller growth and then some evergreens. You definitely have some rocky outcrops, bare earth with fertile land at the bottom and some water, and you have pink clouds, which is kind of strange for Hokusei, but there they are, pink clouds. The entire thing to me speaks of the feminine nature of the earth and the essence of the pervasive nature of the feminine spirit of the earth. So there's that. This is a really important image because I want to convey that this particular geography that's in this image is extremely important and only comes from somebody who knows, and he knows. And let's just continue and we'll see. But keep all this in mind. There's a reason I'm using this image first, because it's really important. The three decans of Sagittarius. The first decan is Hermit. The second decan is called Oyster. In the Hindu, this is the Hindu images from 500 CE. Second decan is Oyster, and the third decan is Metal. I have examples of all these. These are very accurate. There's a lot of accurate symbology in all of these. Looking at the Bible, because Genesis and Numbers both follow the decans very well, there's no question they're written from them. So Genesis 23 through 25 is Sarah dies in the first decan, and Abraham buries her, and then he's alone. In the chapter 24, the second decan of Sagittarius, he sends one of his guys to go get a wife for Isaac. And he returns with Rebecca, who, this involves jewelry, this involves water from the well, it involves all kinds of things. Magic in the Apocrypha, if you go back to this story where the angel accompanies this guy and performs magic with a fish and all this stuff. But the chapter that's in the KJV is Rebecca for Isaac. And there is a mention of meditation also in that chapter, and I do think the second decan of Sagittarius is a great time for meditation. It is a calm place, just like the image from Hokusei shows. It's a very calm and steady place. This is a mature female energy. Now, in chapter 25, this is where Abraham gets Keturah. So there's 3 women in a row, but all 3 very... The first one is he loses his wife, the second one his son gets a wife, and the third one he gets another wife, and he gets all kinds of children and progeny from that. Now in Numbers 23 through 25, also the 3 decans of Sagittarius, and this is the continuing saga of Balak and Balaam that starts in 22, because the 3rd decan of Scorpio spills into the 3 decans of Sagittarius. It spills in. All these energies mix and flow as they go. And Numbers definitely shows that. There's all kinds of trouble that starts with the 3rd decan of Scorpio. It's a conflict, and then it carries over into these 3 where it's resolved. And the final say is the 3rd decan of Sagittarius, which is number 25. That's the ruler, the male ruler of the up that entire sun sign, but it's also it's a stopping point. It's a transition point where something ends, and that conflict begins back in the 3rd decan of Scorpio. So, but what's really more important, what we're talking about here, is number 24, which is Oyster decan. This is where he sees the vision of the Almighty falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. Now, having your eyes open is a very specific terminology for those who are into the spiritual endeavors. What this means is you're actually seeing spirit. You're actually seeing these things. Your eyes are open. You can actually see these beings, or you see something that other people can't see. But it goes on. The valleys spread forth, and there's gardens by the riverside, there's trees, and a line of aloes, which is like a flower, and as cedar trees beside the waters. And there's water pouring out of buckets, and is seed in many waters. So this is a description of a vision that has a lot of specific components to it, which are very close to some very familiar things, but they're very close to the drawing by Hokusei. They're very close to the essence of the 2nd decan of Sagittarius, and they are also very close to the vision of Guadalupe in Mexico. This is a very important thing, but we'll get back to that. In the tarot, it's the 3 of Wands, And while, again, I always say about Pamela Coleman Smith, she did a decent job. That the Four of Wands, which would be the first decan of Sagittarius, she does a good job with showing the trellis, because that's also in Hakusei. It's the only place in Hakusei's 36 drawings where he shows a trellis. The one staff anchored in metal decan, it's anchored with metal, obviously. That's also true. And there's the spillover of the flowers going into the Two of Wands. But the Three of Wands, he's on a hill, or she, don't really know if that's a male or female, do we? A figure is on a hill, and it's partially green, but partially not. And there's water and ships and whatnot, but there's also a phosphorescence there, almost as if facing the setting sun or getting some light. Either way, I did a search for other Three of Wands images, and there's a lot of female tarot images out there. The best one is the largest one. I made it large in this image because, I don't know, I thought that was as good a depiction as any. It's the Mother Goddess. This is not necessarily a virgin. It's very important to understand if you want to understand these things. Now, Virgin Decan is in late August to early September, and the descriptor is a virgin girl carrying a container filled with flowers, dressed in dirty clothes. She desires clothes, wealth, and marriage, and is on her way to the teacher's house. Well, this is the Catholic view of women entirely. This is it. In the Catholic or Christian worldview, this is their decan. This is what they're focused on. But there's plenty of female decans, and there's plenty of female energies, and they are all expressions of the earth. And this, in Oyster, which is later, this is a much more mature edition, or a much more mature version. It's a beautiful woman who shines like gold and champak blossoms, sitting on a throne of medium size, and is presenting jewels from the sea. Now, these are just very, very basic descriptors, but the point here is that when you're seeing apparitions or actually meeting visions or having manifestations, there's a lot to know. It's not a simple thing, and it happens all the time. So those who endeavor into the spiritual arts or the pursuit of something in that arena, it's not uncommon. But for, the church that's basically taken up occupancy around the earth right now, they have a very singular view of these things. But that would not be accurate. Now, the image on the left is what was allegedly produced from this vision, or this manifestation. I would call it a manifestation. But John Paul II, at the canonization ceremony itself, he called Juan Diego a model of evangelization perfectly enculturated. an allusion to the implantation of the Catholic Church within indigenous culture through the medium of the Guadalupe event. Now, it's very important to know that that area where this occurred had long been known as a habitation of a mother spirit, a more of a mature female energy, where manifestations of this type occurred for potentially millennia. It was known. This area was already known before Catholicism ever reached the shore, but they had to, as they say, enculturate this. So they enculturated it as the Virgin. But I can tell you, I have a lot of suspicions that that is not the case. I understand enculturation, I understand syncretization, I understand that, these guys had a lot of soldiers, they had a lot of power, they had a lot of conversion, but they're not really spreading a lot of knowledge about this kind of stuff. They're funneling it into a smaller worldview, and I think I can show that just doing Oyster Decan, which is what I'm doing. So when I see the image of Guadalupe there, and this is the one, I see all these sharp like what are these spikes coming out. That's, to me, I don't know if I can see where an artist might draw that to show light coming out, but I don't know. I could be wrong, but I look at the image and I'm thinking, wow, is that light coming out or light coming in? It looks kind of sharp and spiky and spiny and serrated. I don't know if he captured. There's a lot of different ways you could have drawn that. The figure itself seems to be drawn very well. So I always look for that, like when everything is done very well, but then there's something that just seems odd. That raises questions in my mind. So the way he drew it is just a little odd, and I look at it and I say, well, this happened December 9th through the 12th or 11th, so that's Oyster Decan. The serrations, to me, would more closely fit the idea of growth rings or growth serrations in an oyster shell than it would the phosphorescence, because Virgin Decan does have a phosphorescence, and there are, I'm not going to argue that there aren't apparitions of that feminine presence as well, but what I'm saying is they're different. And yes, I understand Virgin Decan may have flowers, but Oyster Decan has treasure, and she's a little bit more mature. She's looking more for the unity, the union, seeking union, rather than Virgin Decan is seeking wealth, and she's seeking marriage, and she's seeking clothing and child and these things. I can show that time and time again. Virgin Decan, by the way, is the birth time of Mother Teresa and Pascalina Leonard. Now, Pascalina Leonard was the servant of Pope Pius. I think it was the 12th. So many of them Piuses to keep track of, but I think it was Pius XII who moved the feast of the Queenship of Mary to August 22nd from May. And so there's that. We'll get to that when we do Virgin Decan. But they do have similarities. But the differences are that, just like with the growth of any woman, You have younger women, and then you have more mature women. And with more mature women, you have differences in their personas. You have differences in what they are capable of. You have differences in what their priorities are. You have all kinds of differences. And to not allow for that is, I think that's not quite, it's a disservice. Let's just be very plain with it. It's a disservice. So here's the oyster shells, and you can see these striations. The other big thing to know about oyster shells is, if you've never shucked oysters, if you try to shuck oysters all day with your bare hands, you're going to end up with bloody hands. So that was the first thing that struck me about the image, Guadalupe. Wow, it looks sharp and jagged with those spikes sticking out. Doesn't look soft and cuddly. Doesn't look phosphorescent. It looks more like, I don't know, it's just a little sharp. And so that definitely applies more to this type of geometry and this type of reality of the rockiness, the sharp, jagged edges of the rock of an oyster shell. I said, well, let me look at how does everybody else depict light rays or phosphorescence? And yep, there is the sun. When people draw the sun, they have a tendency to draw these little jagged spikes sticking out of it. That is true. It kind of does. But look at which direction the dark spikes are facing, as opposed to the Guadalupe image. They're reversed, aren't they? So the light rays, generally they would come out in a ray and spread, and they kind of do, but the dark area then would be spiked and pointing inward, not outward, whereas he has the dark area pointing outward. So it's kind of the opposite of what we see when we look at actual light rays. It's just a point. And here's the actual hill, Tepeyac Hill. Is that how, don't hold me to the pronunciations, but there's the actual hill. They built the statue. Of course, there's a major thing that goes on here. This is a big deal. They seized upon this moment to really invigorate the conversion of these people. Now, the indigenous spiritual leaders of this area for millennia regarded this as a mother goddess, not necessarily again, there's a difference between a virgin and a mother. There's a big difference. And there's a lot of interesting things going on here. You've got the flowers, you've got water gushing out of the hill. The water is a big deal, okay, because oyster definitely has water. There's an abundance of water. Even eating oysters, you're eating a shellfish that's almost all water. It's salt water, but this is fresh water, and there's a definite line of continuity about water. I mean, when the servant goes to get Rebecca, she's serving him water, right, from the well for his camels. This is where he goes. He goes to find the well, to find the water. Find the water, find the girl. That's what the story's about. Find the water, find the girl, find the treasure, find find the perfect bride for this progeny, or abundance, the ability to carry on. And there's the rocky outcrop, very similar to Hakuse's drawing, I would say. And I'm not one to always see faces in trees, and a lot of people see faces in trees and rocks and all the, oh, look, there's a face. But I can't help but notice, going up along that ridge, that there does seem to be faces sticking out of those rocks, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the first one to say that. And I didn't, I haven't talked to anybody about that. I've never been there. I did in the process of gathering information for this, I did speak to somebody who's been there many times, and their reflection was that, hey, there's something very spiritual about that place, and there's a lot of people that go there. I mean, I believe that's the summation, and I trust that person. They're pretty spiritually intuitive, and they said, yeah, there's definitely something there, but whether or not it's the whole Catholic thing, that's to be determined, but definitely a connection with the water. The water's a big deal, and the hill and the composition of it is a big deal, in my opinion, from looking at all the other cultures, all the other examples. This looks to me to be the perfect example of a manifestation of the feminine essence that dwells in the time of Oyster Decan, not virgin. Here's what time it is. On the left is my image. You could call it a clock. It's a functional piece of art. I've got the 20 days on the inside, bots through Z, and on the outside, acts through ship, or the 32 decans. The 4 decans, the 4 warning decans on the outside, the floaters in their place of habitation. So when we go through Bear Decan, it's the opposite of where we're going. Now, that the opposites always have an interaction with what's going on with time. When you're keeping track of time, you're not just going through Aquarius or Pisces or something like that. There's all kinds of things going on, and there's all kinds of ways to verify this. So on the bottom left, or the bottom right arrow that I show to the line there, that's what time it is. We're about to go into Vulture Decan. The brown area there, that's Vulture, and it looks as though we've passed through the second day, which is E, and I would say I would give that about let's say a 20% effect on what we've been through. And it's manifested in the physical with roads and railroad tracks and the pathways all around the earth, because E is the road, it is the path, it is the going from one place to another, and the tramplings that happen because of that, depending on what species. But for the human species, all the roads are built. All we're doing now is maintaining roads. There's not a lot of new roads being built anymore. We've kind of done all that. Wagon is the decan we were coming out of, because its occurrence is after water in the precessional age. So we went through the Industrial Revolution, we made all the roads, we made all the wagons, and now everybody has a wagon driving up and down the road. Well, at least until coronavirus hit. Now there's a lot of parked wagons, but either way, we're leaving, on the other side, we're leaving those energies where I would give Eek about a 40%, right? So you've got a 20% in E, you've got about a 40% in Eek. And that's how that works. So that's why that's the dominant religion. And that is the symbol for it for that day in the ancient Maya glyphs. And what a coincidence, halfway back around 12,000 years ago, somebody buried Göbekli Tepe, and there's a reason they buried it, and they're always trying to figure out, why did they bury it? I don't know why they buried it. Maybe they buried it because they knew, okay, that time is over, it's time to move on. That's the smart thing to do, that's the way we should be behaving, and that's what we should be doing now. You've got to move your spirituality with your time. It's going to happen. It's just how reluctant or how difficult it is can definitely play a role in whether or not it's a smooth transition. But if you were smart and you were honest, it would be a no-brainer. Nobody would be complaining. Nobody would be agonizing over it. Nobody'd be, no, that's not the truth, blah, blah, blah. Look, exactly on the other side, 12,000 years ago, that's where they would have built that. There's the symbol for it. All the stones are in a T shape. There's the reason for it. It's pretty simple. It's not a controversy in my mind. If you know what time it is, or how to use calendars. Going out of Bear is the good news, for the most part, kind of, is, that's a time of war. And boy, did we do it for the last 100 years. This industrial age, we've a lot of war, massive war. We got airplanes, right? War with airplanes, the most destructive type of war we could have had, and that's Eek, is the air. It is flying. So we're flying, we've got all our roads built, and so I'm just showing you what time it is here. I would say take it with a grain of salt, but I wouldn't take it with a grain of salt. I'd take that with a pile of rocks. I'd take that with a pile of rocks, because I can assure you I've spent no small amount of time trying to make sure that I'm correct on this. That is what time it is. We're moving into Vulture, and the shape is well, we'll get into that when we do Vulture Decan, but I think you'll agree after that. Let's get back to Oyster. You can see where Oyster is in this. So if you start with Axe and you go around and you count all the female Decans, by the time you get to Oyster, it's pretty mature. This is a mother energy. Lotus is the next female Decan after Oyster, and that's the fully mature feminine aspect, the feminine ruler in humanity. That's where you find them. You're going to go to any bank and you're going to find women born in Lotus Decan working in there behind the scenes. May not be the front, but they'll be behind the scenes. But Christine Lagarde, there, she's born in Lotus. But either way, just saying, this is a mature energy, and it is extremely feminine. It is concerned with division. It is concerned with the strife between people that most of the time men cause because they get emotional or concerned or insecure or dominating and all of these things. This is very heavily accentuated by Bear Decan. That is a fighter. Fight everybody. That's what's been going on. Fight everybody. Not everybody's fighting everybody, but there's definitely fighting everywhere. Here's a list of some people and what they've done that were born in Oyster Decan. I thought this was pretty interesting because these are systems that are concerned with children or disabled, or disease that affect a lot of children. Polio was, right, it affected a lot of children. Walt Disney is, how many mothers, right? Mothers are, I think, for the most part, put all the politics of Disney aside. Of course, there's always the absence of the mother in Disney. Like, the mother always dies in Disney, but that's could be something to look at. You might look at that a little differently if you look through the eyes of Oyster Decan. She's not really gone. It's the mother spirit. The American School for the Deaf, that certainly helped a lot of children and continues to, as well as the Dewey Decimal System, very widespread system for the blind. I don't know, there it is, the blind and the deaf, and the entertainment for all the children, the hopes and dreams, the happy endings, and the polio vaccine, which ended a lot of handicap situations. Eli Whitney was born in Oyster Decan. I thought the geometry of the flower was very interesting, as well as the properties and the benefits of the cotton plant itself. Of course, cotton was associated with a lot of slavery, so mothers get a little concerned when their children are abused from a labor perspective, right? I mean, child abuse and other types of inhuman oppression are often visited and attended to by the feminine spirit of the earth. Yeah, that's definitely what happens. It's true. But that the geometry of the flower, that's a cotton flower. And then the product, when you go to pick cotton, what you might not know is the reason why the cotton gin helped so much, it alleviated so much pain, because that shell on that cotton plant is a lot like an oyster. If you shuck oysters all day, your hands are going to be mincemeat. You're going to have cuts. They're sharp, they're jagged, they're nasty. They cut you, and you've got to be either really good at it and super careful, and be, very agile with your hands, or you better wear gloves. Most people wear gloves when they're shucking oysters. When you're picking cotton, you better wear these little finger guards, because that shell that protects that cotton, when it bursts open, it splits at the tip, and there's a real sharp, jagged point to it. It's like a briar. It's like a rose bush almost. It's like little prickers, and it tears your hands up. And then there's at the base of that also is kind of sharp and jagged and more prickly, right at the base of it. So when you're trying to get that stuff out of there and you're running your fingers up and down the sides of those shells, or dealing with those prickers to get it out of there, it's nasty work. You will get your hands torn up. It just happens. So I find that to be highly interesting. Eli Whitney was born in Oyster Decan, and he invented that machine that prevented all that agonizing labor very closely associated with another oppressive system of slavery. But even more than that, the slavery was associated with a painful task, very arduous, of picking cotton. It's a nasty, nasty job. But the product is amazing. It makes our clothing. And there you have it. This is Bernini is a sculptor born in Oyster, Decan, and that's a very motherly sculpture, right, on the right, and just sculpting is an interesting trend I see in the Decans, where there's definitely some Decans that have more sculptors than others. Certainly in the days you'll see that much more poignantly, but here there are a lot of sculptors in Oyster Decan. There's faces in the rocks, and they see them. And so Bernini's pretty famous sculptor. He's got a lot of stuff around. Born in Oyster Decan. This is the fountain that he sculpted. It's got all kinds of symbology to it, but basically you're back at this, sculpting faces from the rock, very jagged look to that, a lot of geometry, and there's water pouring out of it. And I thought the one on the left looked pretty oysterish, but the one on the right also has a lot of geometry that just continues and continues through this Decan. The essence of it is humanity and stone and water. Pierre Philippe Tomier, I think I'm saying that properly. This guy is an artist who does, when you're carving gold, it's right, gold, silver, fine decorative pieces. This guy is very well known. He's got a ton of stuff. But I thought the wreath, I'll call it a wreath, with the hands is almost identical to the image of the Hindu Decan. And so he just does this stuff over and over and over. But the piece on the top that's the kind of stuff you look for, is that exact finger placement, that exact type of imagery, and we'll see it over and over and over again. What's even the purpose of that thing? It's too big for a bracelet, doesn't look like it fit really well on your head. It's an ornament. It's some kind of ornamentation. Now, maybe you could say, well, it goes on your head, but she's presenting the Oyster Decan. These are very highly spiritually evolved drawings. She's presenting this ring, and you'll see it over and over and over. Giovanni Gioseffo dal Sole, or Soul, we'll call it Soul. There it is, what I would consider to be his masterpiece, right next to the Decan image. Specific geometry, the other thing to notice about this, I forgot to mention it with Virgin, when I did the comparison with Virgin Decan and Oyster Decan, is Oyster doesn't smile. There's not a lot of smiling going on. Virgin Decan had a little smile on her face. Oyster Decan does not smile. There's not a lot of smiling going on. There's strife. When you got a house full of kids, you got all these problems, stuff going on everywhere. There's no smiling. Got work to do. Trying to solve problems. We're trying to keep the kids from killing each other. And by kids, I think I'm including men in that. Men are nasty. Do all kinds of stuff. We don't have an outbreak of sex abuse by women, do we? We don't have a lot of war because of women, do we? But there it is, specific geometry in the painting, and always this very troubled. There's troubles. There's troubles, there's death, there's life. She's not holding a baby, she's holding a skull. This is a matured, right? This is a mature, feminine energy. This isn't the young virgin. I have William Gropper, and this starts bringing into this aspect of stacking people. I call it stacking people, and that's actually a term that I would call in art just from studying this Decan. Stacking people. He stacks them all in there. All the people are stacked up. They're like in a pile. They're in a, like, look at the guys going up the telephone pole. It's like a stack of people. Then you go into the labor aspect. There's this pile of guys. They're all piled up. These guys are all climbing up on the rock, and they're all piled up there. They're all climbing on the stuff. Piles of them. And even when they show people sitting at a table, they're all in a row. They're stacked up like, and you'll see that similarity as we go. It's very important. Howard Finster got famous by doing a couple of album covers. One of them for REM. I can't remember who else he did for, but he's a guy, he's got a very interesting style. It's not what a lot of people would consider fine art, but he definitely has something weird going on, and I think he was just he was a fervent Christian too, but he produced all these weird drawings. I mean, I gotta think that a lot of churches look at this and go, oh my God, what is this guy? He's possessed or something. But there's piles of faces in the rock. And then the animals. The animals have this very distinctive, he's looking at this. He's got faces piled in the rocks and these animal heads. And he does it over and over. For good reason. He's a great example. And there's one of his images with these animal heads and more people, faces piled up in the rocks, just looks like piles of rocks with faces in them. And the image on the zodiac of Dendera in Egypt, that is the glyph for Oyster Decan. And it is a stone upon which is a stack of animal heads, most likely rams or female sheep, because they use these as symbols for heritage and prodigy. And at the head is a round stone with no face, but it's hard to tell. The one going to the left from that is Metal Decan, and he's definitely sitting on a throne. He definitely has an oblong head with horns. And that's a very good depiction of that Decan as well. The one after that would be Rope, which would be another male Decan, first Decan of Capricorn, and the one behind him is Lotus. So that's the proper count, that's the proper image, and that is why these images, this symbology, this is how you get it, is through being spiritual and artistic at the same time. And you come up with these very consistent geometric principles and expressions in your art. And that's what that is. So, yeah, Howard Finster is the closest to the Egyptian symbol for this Decan. But not completely. And here's Rudolph Hausner. He's a very well-known artist. I mean, this guy was bizarre before we were allowed to be bizarre, but I just noticed, like he's got all these rings, he's got pearls or spheres, here he's got even a set of breasts and a belly on himself. Very good self-portrait of a man born in a female Decan. He picks it up very well. He's definitely, what I would consider to be a surrealist. He's got all these different, very bizarre but yet very specific geometric principles in his paintings. And he doesn't smile. There's no smiling. The girl has, was that a slight grin? I don't know. Tough to say. It's not a frown. It's not really a smile. So, again, just keep looking for all the facial expressions. Do we have any smiling? Do we have any... There's a lot of that. Can be very consistent through studying it this way, but he's definitely got some pearls and wombs and all kinds of oyster type. I thought very interesting with in the upper left, the ring on the ground, the egg, the head, which looks like a pearl inside an oyster that looks like a body of water that's actually shaped like an oyster. So, I don't know. I mean, that's what I see when I look at it. Could be clouds, could be this, could be that, could be a star, whatever. It's still oyster geometry, and very feminine, very bizarre. I mean, I don't know. I think the guy was tuned in pretty good. Yeah, he's got it going on. Some more of his images. He gets down to basics. He can drive himself down to minimalism, but then he can also let out his emotions. So, great set of drawings, great set of paintings that he has to look at for this Decan. It's a treasure. I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. The pleated skirt of the woman in the center of the picture on the top left, the pleated skirt, very interesting. The motherly figure in the center of the other one. It's pretty simple. The sun and the moon and the pearl. Otto Dix, here's another one. Now, he's got piles of bodies, and yeah, he was during that time. Maybe it's good. Artists are certainly influenced by their time. I also think this is natural art for him. I think even the woman there, who's not, she kind of is smiling, but I like the rose, and I don't know, I think that's a particularly cheery and still reserved painting of his. He's not a cheery guy. He doesn't smile. Even him, self-portrait with a flower. I mean, how do you match that face with that flower? What's going on there? This is a serious Decan. Problems are serious. Here's his depiction, I think, of the Lady of Guadalupe on the left. I don't know if it was, something I'm sure a lot of artists were drawn to as the big thing during the time, right? But was he drawn to it more than others because of, maybe he said, oh, wow, that happened during my time? I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, he's got Halloween and birth and life and death all in one picture over there. You see in the whole picture, and in an odd way, and all the while the main figure of the picture is just trying to nurture, in the midst of all the chaos and the monsters. She just wants to nurture. I thought that's a very accurate depiction of Oyster Decan, and that is the essence of the vision of Guadalupe. Lucian Freud painted himself with a light overhead, but really it's kind of an oyster. He's got his children down below him, just like the Bernini sculptures. Pretty interesting. Very famous painting, Lucian Freud. And Hausner images are labeled RH, and I thought, well, this is interesting. Hausner's got himself two different paintings where he's got this same circular geometry over his head. Freud does it a little differently. Did Freud kind of look at Hausner's stuff? I don't know. Do they feed off of each other? Probably. Either way, I found a trend between Hausner, Freud, and the next guy, Nadir Alfonso. So they kind of, I think a lot of times these guys do feed off of each other, but they also might find commonality because they are all born in the same time, and that's the more likely scenario because these guys are fiercely independent and fiercely doing their own thing. So I don't think they would, these guys aren't copiers of somebody else, but they might have common elements because they're all born in the same time, right? So they're all born in Oyster, Decan. And here's Nadir Alfonso. He's from Portugal, so he has his Lady of Guadalupe up there on the left hand, and there's the RH of, Hausner's drawings or paintings, and there is some similarity there when they get into the expressive and in the minimalist tendencies of either one. There's some, what I would call common elements. That's what I would call them. I would say there's a pretty common string of, not plurality, but pearls and oysters. That's what I see. J.P. Morgan was a famous actress. I think she was one of the first directors, female directors. Like, I think she actually directed movies in a time when, but I thought, yeah, she's pretty famous. And there you see the stacked people again, and also the pleated dress. That's an interesting fashion choice. People say, well, yeah, it's a style that it's not a common style. That pleated is, yeah, you see it once in a while, but okay. The stacked people and the pleated dress and the eyes. Look at the eyes on the particularly on the album cover there, where she's wearing the pearl necklace. If you look at her eyes, that is the eyes that I see in Oyster, the females in Oyster Decan. Those are the eyes I find. Now, watch the next one. Dion Ferris, and look at her eyes, you see. It's a very calm mind that is in Oyster Decan. And you can imagine that perhaps sometimes these anthropomorphic, yeah. The reason why we attribute animal symbols and traits is because of these very obscure tendencies, and this is a calm mind. You can imagine an oyster is in an emotional environment surrounded by water, but it's also very tucked in there with the shell, opens with the moon. It's just a whole lot of femininity there, but she chose this fashion statement at the award ceremony, and it's a pleated, I don't know, I looked at it, I said, oh my god, look at this oyster shell. That looks to me like an oyster shell. And she looks very happy to have it. And she is an artist, and she is an artist of her image. And I think she did a pretty good job. And definitely right there in the center of this Decan. Now this is a kind of a bizarre example, but she's not necessarily an artist, but she kind of is. I'm kind of bringing this girl into the realm of artist because, I don't know, first of all, she's unique in so many ways. She's one of the very first prosecuted female whistleblowers, certainly the only. Is she the only one? She's definitely the most famous female military. Worked in intelligence. She's being prosecuted for unauthorized release of government information. So she's trying to tell the truth, or she's trying to tell the people. Her allegiance is to the people, which is appropriate. And it's supposed to be that way in the military. I understand you got to follow orders. I understand you got hierarchies and you got processes and you got things, but I don't think she hurt anybody, and I think she did the right thing, and her name is Reality Winner. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And the movement to try to free her, there's the circle of the presentation of Oyster Decan. There is not a single open mouth smile. Okay, even when she's smiling, like really happy, when she looks really happy on the left, that's still a tight-lipped grin. We're not smiling, people. She's got a grin. She's not frowning. But I don't know if it actually graduates into a smile. This is a time of strife. This is serious stuff, motherhood stuff. But there's the ring. Reality Winner. That's her name. I mean, very interesting. This is a modern artist. I actually know this person. Very helpful to my understanding of this, because this is one of the most difficult decans in the Pantheon. Now, it is a very difficult decan. It's one of the most complex, but it's also doesn't have a ton of outspoken, famous people, which makes it hard. So if you go out into society, you're going to have a much better opportunity to get a much better view of people born in this time, and you're going to see it right away. They have a very calm, steady mind, and they're going to be very strong defenders of their children. They're going to be very decent providers, very steady. If you're an employer and a man born in this decan comes to work for you, you could have yourself a very steady, loyal, reliable worker if you treat each other well and the skill is there. It's a great. But Priscilla is, she's a gifted artist, and she has a very calm mind. That's the way I would describe it. It's very steady. It's like a stone. But there's some of her art. This is a wall. She does wall murals. Lives in the Philadelphia area. I thought an appropriate image to end this with, in the lengthy discussion about the inculturation of the Mother Goddess with the Virgin by the Catholics in Guadalupe, the Lady of Guadalupe there. I don't approve. I think that when you narrow everything down to, when you pick one aspect in a really a whittled down polytheistic set, and you just pick one and say, yeah, this is God, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not, because the center of all, the creator of all, right? They're just picking and choosing. They're coming out of a time. They knew it would favor them financially. So colonization is a big deal. We're going to have to clean this mess up. This is not okay. It's not okay what happened there, and I think the Lady of Guadalupe is a major example that when you're talking about spiritual knowledge coming into your country, if it usurps yours, but your existing knowledge was better, well, that's downgrading your culture. And that's exactly what happened. So I think everybody understands, oh, the inventions are great. I like all the progress the world has. I like the abundance. But the spiritual nature of this has been an absolute tragedy. And I think it's depicted in all the art that I look at when I see what the Oyster Decan produces. And I see death, I see children that are troubled, I see this is indicative of the spirit, the soul of humanity. It's not okay. But I think Priscilla does a great job anyway. So, and then of course, as a just grading the examples for the Decan, I love that what she did there on the stone. That's a stone, right? On the right, obviously the one on the left is oyster shells on the woman's head, and that's a great image. I like that. Very watery. But the one on the right, I think, is extremely accurate. You've got children. You've got a mature mother who is keeping the house safe for growth. She symbolizes the center of the family, and on the right is the flowers and the light from the Lady of Guadalupe. So that's, again, you'll see this continuously. There was a lot of artists I did not show in this. There's a ton of people who all they ever did was draw flowers, 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 flowers. I was going to get into it. It's long enough already. Maybe as an adjunct later on, after all the decans are done, I could come back and do a double tap on this, because there was a ton of artists in this decan that all they paint is flowers, and some of them are, museum type, people, a lot of them actually. So, anyway, that's all I have to say today.